Tonight, I will tell you a story about power, law, and the heavy price of doing the right thing. It takes place in the heart of New York City, in a building made of cold stone and old wood. Usually, this building is a place of quiet order. But on this rainy Tuesday morning, something in the air felt different. Something felt dangerous. In Lower Manhattan, the streets are always loud. Yellow taxis honk their horns. Subways rumble underground. And tourists talk in a dozen languages. But if you walk up the wide steps of the federal courthouse and push open the heavy bronze doors, the noise disappears. Suddenly, there's only silence. Judge Elena Ross stood inside her private office, which lawyers call chambers. The room was large and smelled of old books and furniture polish. Outside her window, gray rain fell against the thick glass. Elena was 55 years old. She had kind eyes, but a mouth that rarely smiled while she was working. She reached for a hook on her door and took down her black robe. This was her ritual every morning. She put her arms through the sleeves and zipped it up. The robe was heavy. It covered her normal clothes. It covered her personality. When she wore this black silk, she was no longer Elena. She was simply the court. She walked to the window and looked down at the street below. Even through the thick glass, she could hear a low, deep sound. It sounded like the ocean, but it was not water. It was the sound of thousands of people screaming. They were standing in the rain, holding signs, waiting for the trial to begin. Elena looked at her hands. They were steady. They did not shake. But she knew the truth. She knew that by the end of this day, she would have to make a choice that could burn this city down. The wooden door behind the judge's bench opened, and the air in the room changed instantly. A court officer, a large man with a deep voice, shouted two words that cracked through the silence like a whip. All rise. Every person in the room stood up at the same time. There was a sound of chairs scraping against the floor and the rustle of stiff clothing. Elena walked up the 3 small steps to her high desk. She did not look at the crowd. She arranged her papers, sat down, and picked up her wooden gavel. Bang. Be seated, she said. Her voice was not loud, but it was clear. It was the voice of authority. From her high seat, Elena could see everything. To her left sat the defendant, Mr. Thorne. He was a billionaire, a man who owned hotels and television stations. The public hated him because he was arrogant. He acted like he was better than everyone else. Even now, facing 20 years in prison, he looked bored. He wore a gray suit that cost more than a car, and he tapped a gold pen against the table. He did not look like a criminal. He looked like a king who was annoyed by a small inconvenience. To her right sat the prosecutor, Mr. Vance. Vance was different. He was young, ambitious, and hungry for fame. He knew the cameras were waiting outside. He stood up straight, pulled down his jacket, and looked at the jury with a practiced smile. He wanted to be the hero who took down the giant. The trial began. Usually, the start of a trial is boring. It is full of small rules, numbers, and dates. It is the slow, dry machinery of the law. But today, every small word felt heavy. Your Honor, Mr. Vance said, his voice booming for the reporters in the back row. The government is ready to prove that this man is a thief and a liar. We are ready to give the people the justice they demand. He spoke with passion. He spoke with fire. The people in the room nodded. They wanted a show, and Vance was giving them a show. Elena watched him over the rim of her reading glasses. She did not nod. She felt a small, cold knot in her stomach. This was her first problem. Mr. Vance was not arguing the law. He was acting for an audience. He was confident. He was smooth. Mr. Vance smiled at the jury, thinking he had already won the room. He turned to his table and picked up a thick folder of documents. He held it up like a trophy. He thought he was untouchable. But in his rush to be a hero, he had made one small, silent mistake, and only Judge Elena saw it. Mr. Vance walked to the center of the room. He held up a single piece of paper. It looked light and harmless, but in a courtroom, paper is a weapon. Your Honor, Vance said, his voice dropping to a dramatic whisper. This document proves everything. This is an email written by Mr. Thorne himself. In this email, he admits to the crime. He admits to stealing the money. A gasp went through the room. The reporters in the back row leaned forward, their pens scratching fast against their notebooks. The jury looked at Mr. Thorne with shock. It was the smoking gun, the one piece of evidence that makes the truth undeniable. But before Vance could hand the paper to the jury, the defense attorney stood up. He was an older man with gray hair and a tired face. He did not shout. He spoke very quietly. Objection. Your Honor, he said. The police found this email on a private server. They did not have a search warrant. They broke into the digital account without permission from a judge. The room went silent. Elena looked at Mr. Vance. Is this true? Mr. Prosecutor? Did you get a warrant? Vance's face turned red. He waved his hand dismissively. It is a technicality. Your Honor, a small mistake. The important thing is the truth. The email is real. The man is guilty. We cannot let a small rule hide a big crime. Elena held out her hand. Let me see it. She took the paper. She read the words. Mr. Vance was right. The email proved that Mr. Thorne was a criminal. Morally, he was guilty. But the defense attorney was also right. The police had been lazy. They had ignored the rules to get this paper fast. Elena felt a headache beginning behind her eyes. This was the trap of the law. The Constitution says the government cannot just take things, even from bad people, without a legal reason. if she allowed this evidence, she would help catch a criminal today. But she would also say that the police can break the rules whenever they want. She looked at the flag standing in the corner of the room. She looked at the angry face of the prosecutor. She looked at the arrogant face of Mr. Thorne, who was smiling again. The whole city wanted her to say aloud. The whole city wanted vengeance. But Elena was not a vending machine for vengeance. She was a guardian of the process. She placed the paper flat on her desk. It was the most important evidence in the case of the century. It was real. It was true. But in the eyes of the law, it was poison. She picked up her heavy black fountain pen. Her hand hovered over the order sheet. She knew that the ink from this pen was about to stain her reputation forever. Elena took a deep breath. The air in the room felt thin and cold. She looked directly at Mr. Vance, the ambitious prosecutor. Mr. Vance, she said, the law is not a suggestion. The law is a wall. If the police climb over that wall to get evidence, they cannot bring it into this room. She paused. The silence was absolute. The motion is granted, she said firmly. The email is excluded. The jury will never see it. For 1 second, nobody moved. Then, the room exploded with noise. Mr. Vance slammed his notebook onto the table. His face was purple with anger. The reporters in the back row jumped up and ran to the doors to call their editors. Mr. Thorne, the billionaire defendant, leaned back in his chair and smiled a slow, cruel smile. He knew he had just won a massive victory. Elena banged her gavel 3 times. Bang! 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 But the order in her court was broken. She stood up and walked quickly out of the room, her black robe flowing behind her like a dark cloud. She did not look back. That evening, the ride home was miserable. The rain was falling harder now, turning the New York streets into rivers of black water. Usually, Elena felt proud after a long day. Tonight, she felt like a fugitive. She unlocked the door to her apartment. It was a quiet place on the Upper West Side, filled with soft lamps and classical music. It was her sanctuary. But tonight, the world outside found a way in. She walked to the kitchen and made a cup of tea. Her hands were cold. She walked to the living room and turned on the television. She needed to know what they were saying. Every channel was the same. Her face was on the screen. It was a photo taken years ago, where she looked severe and unsmiling. Beneath her face, the headlines flashed in bright red letters: Judge protects billionaire. Justice denied. Is she corrupt? A news anchor with perfect hair and a serious voice was speaking. Today, Judge Elena Ross shocked the city. She threw out the most important evidence in the Thorne case. Legal experts are asking, is she following the law, or is she protecting the powerful? Elena turned off the TV. The room went dark. She sat on her sofa, holding the warm cup of tea against her chest. She was not corrupt. She was not protecting the powerful. She was protecting the Constitution. But the news did not explain the Constitution. The news only sold anger. She took a sip of tea. It tasted bitter. She told herself that the anger would pass. She told herself that tomorrow would be a normal day. She stood up and walked toward her bedroom, thinking the worst part of the storm was over. She was wrong. She did not know who was waiting for her in the shadows of the morning. The next morning, the rain was still falling. It washed the gray streets of Manhattan, but it could not wash away the anger. When Elena arrived at the courthouse, she had to walk through a back door to avoid the reporters. She felt like a thief in her own building. She entered her chambers and hung up her wet coat. She expected silence. Instead, she found a man sitting in her leather armchair. It was Charles Hammond. Charles was not a lawyer. He was a United States senator, a powerful politician, and, more importantly, he was Elena's oldest friend. They had gone to law school together 30 years ago. He was the one person she trusted in this city of sharks. "Charles?" she said, surprised. "How did you get past security?" Charles stood up. He looked tired. He did not smile. "I have my ways. Elena, we need to talk." Elena walked to her desk and sat down. She did not offer him coffee. She knew this was not a social visit. "You saw the news," she said. "Everyone saw the news," Charles replied. He walked to the window and looked down at the protesters. "Elena, listen to me. The city is a powder keg. If that man goes free because of a technicality, the streets will explode, and your career will end. The president is watching this case. Everyone is watching." Elena felt a sharp pain in her chest. She expected attacks from the media. She did not expect an attack from Charles. "Are you asking me to change my mind?" she asked quietly. "Are you asking me to break the law to make the president happy?" "I am asking you to be realistic," Charles said, his voice rising. "Justice is about the result. Elena, everyone knows Thorne is guilty. If you let him go, you are not a hero. You are a fool." Elena stood up. She was small, but in that moment, she looked taller than the senator. "No, Charles," she said. "Justice is not about the result. It is about the rules. If I break the rules to catch a bad man, then I become the bad man. I took an oath to protect the Constitution, not my career." The room was very quiet. The sound of the rain against the glass felt loud. Charles looked at her for a long time. Then he shook his head slowly. The warmth in his eyes was gone. "I tried to help you, Elena, but if you go back into that courtroom and let him walk away, I cannot protect you." He picked up his coat and walked to the door. He did not say goodbye. The heavy oak door clicked shut, leaving a silence that felt heavier than the noise outside. Elena looked at the empty chair. She had kept her integrity, but she had lost her only ally. As she prepared to go back into the courtroom for the final verdict, she realized a terrifying truth. She was now truly alone in this fight. The trial ended 3 days later. The lawyers made their final speeches. Mr. Vance shouted about justice and victims. The defense attorney spoke quietly about rules in doubt. Then, the jury left the room to decide. For 7 hours, the courthouse was a place of waiting. Waiting is the hardest part of the law. Finally, a light flashed on the judge's desk. It was a signal. The jury was coming back. All rise. Elena walked back into the room. The atmosphere was so heavy it felt hard to breathe. The air conditioner hummed, but the room felt hot. Every seat was full. The reporters were leaning forward, their phones ready to send the news to the world. Mr. Thorne stood up. For the first time, he did not look like a king. He looked pale. He was sweating. He knew that without the email, the case against him was weak, but he also knew that juries are unpredictable. They're just 12 normal people. They could hate him enough to send him to prison anyway. The 12 jurors walked in. They looked tired. They walked in a single line, their eyes fixed on the floor. They did not look at the prosecutor. They did not look at the billionaire. Elena sat down. She looked at the jury foreman, a schoolteacher with glasses. Mr. Foreman, she said, her voice steady. Has the jury reached a verdict? We have, Your Honor, the man said. He stood up. He was holding a small piece of folded paper. His hand was shaking. The silence in the room was absolute. You could hear a heartbeat. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the city was holding its breath. Elena gripped the arms of her chair. She closed her eyes for 1 second. She did not pray for a conviction. She did not pray for an acquittal. She prayed for the safety of the law itself. She had thrown out the evidence to protect the rules. Now, she had to accept the result. What say you? Elena asked, guilty or not guilty? The foreman unfolded the paper. He cleared his throat. He looked at Mr. Thorne. Then he looked at the judge. In the matter of the United States versus Mr. Thorne, he said, we find the defendant not guilty. The words hung in the air for a moment, frozen in time. Then, reality crashed back into the room. Mr. Thorne slumped into his chair, covering his face with his hands. Mr. Vance dropped his pen, his face white with shock. Elena sat perfectly still. She watched the room. She watched the history being made. She knew that outside these walls, the anger was about to begin. But inside her mind, there was a strange, terrifying calm. The words not guilty usually bring shouts of joy or screams of anger. But in this room, there was no cheering. Mr. Thorne did not jump up. He did not hug his lawyer. He simply let out a long, shaky breath. He picked up his expensive gold pen and put it in his pocket. He looked smaller than before. He knew how close he had come to the edge of the cliff. He walked out of the courtroom quickly, surrounded by guards, disappearing into the back corridors of the building. He was free, but he did not look like a winner. He looked like a man running away from a fire. Mr. Vance, the prosecutor, sat alone at his table. The ambitious fire in his eyes was gone. He slowly packed his papers into his leather bag. He looked at the empty chair where the smoking gun email had been. He realized too late that in his rush to win, he had lost everything. Elena remained in her high chair. She watched the room empty out. The jury left. The reporters ran out to shout their stories to the cameras. Slowly, the heavy silence returned to the room. She waited for the sound of breaking glass. She waited for the riots. But outside the window, the roaring crowd had gone quiet. Perhaps they were shocked. Perhaps, deep down, they understood. This was the strange twist of the law. Today, a bad man went free. That felt wrong. But because he went free, the Constitution remained strong. That was right. Elena realized that justice is not a machine that always gives you the answer you want. Justice is a promise. It is a promise that the rules apply to everyone, to the poor, to the rich, to the loved, and to the hated. If the government could break the rules to catch Mr. Thorne, they could break the rules to catch anyone. By letting him go, she had protected the invisible line that kept everyone else safe. It was a victory, but it did not feel like one. It felt hollow. It felt cold. The side door opened, and an old woman in a blue uniform walked in. She carried a broom and a dustpan. She did not look at the judge. She began to sweep the floor where the billionaire had stood. Elena stood up. She took off her reading glasses. The case of the century was over. The papers were filed. The history books were written. She turned and walked back into her chambers, leaving the empty room to the cleaning lady and the silent flag. Now, let's look at this story one more time. From a distance, let us see the shape of the mountain we just climbed. There was a judge named Elena in New York City. She was a woman who loved silence and rules. Outside her window, the city was loud and messy, but inside her courtroom, everything had to be perfect. One day, a very rich and arrogant man named Mr. Thorne came to her court. The government said he stole money. The people of New York hated him. They stood outside in the rain and screamed for justice. They wanted him to go to prison forever. The prosecutor wanted to be a hero. He showed the judge an email. This email proved that Mr. Thorne was guilty. It was a perfect evidence. But there was a problem. The police had broken the rules to get this email. They stole it from a private computer without permission. Judge Elena had a difficult choice. She could allow the evidence and make the city happy. Or she could follow the Constitution and make the city angry. Her oldest friend, a powerful politician, told her to choose the easy path. He told her to punish the bad man. But Elena said no. She knew that the law is like a wall. If you break the wall to catch one bad wolf, you leave the door open for other wolves to come in later. She threw the evidence in the trash. She followed the rules. Because of her choice, the jury could not convict the man. They said 2 words, not guilty. Mr. Thorne walked away free. The prosecutor lost. The crowd was furious. But in the quiet of the empty courtroom, something important remained. The bad man was free, but the law was safe. Elena understood that true justice is not about making people happy. True justice is about keeping a promise, the promise that the rules are the same for everyone. I was there. I was the one who handed her the pen. My name is Marcus, and I am 24 years old. I am Judge Ross's law clerk. That means I help her research the laws. I carry her heavy books, and I sit next to her on the bench every day. When the trial began, I was angry. I looked at Mr. Thorne, the billionaire, and I saw a bad man. I saw his expensive suit and his cruel smile. I wanted him to go to prison. I thought, this is simple. He is bad. We are good. We must punish him. Then, the prosecutor brought out that email. I saw it. I read it. My heart beat fast because I knew this paper would destroy Mr. Thorne. I waited for Judge Elena to say, yes. I waited for her to be the hero. But she said, no. I remember looking at her face. She did not look like a hero. She looked like a statue made of ice. In that moment, I was disappointed. I thought, why is she protecting him? Does she not care about the truth? That night, I went home and saw the angry news reports. I saw the people screaming in the street. I felt afraid. I thought about quitting. I did not want to work for a judge who the whole city hated. I thought she was making a terrible mistake. But then came the final day. I sat next to her while we waited for the verdict. The room was hot. The noise was loud. Everyone was sweating. The lawyers, the defendant, even me. But I looked at Judge Elena's hands. They were resting on the desk. They were perfectly still. That was when I understood. It is easy to do the right thing when everyone claps for you. It is easy to follow the rules when the rules give you what you want. But it is terrifying to follow the rules when the result is something you hate. When the jury said not guilty, I felt sick. I hated that Mr. Thorne was free. But I looked at Elena, and I felt something new. I felt respect. I realized she was the bravest person in the room. She was the only one who cared more about the system than her own reputation. She taught me that the law is not a sword to attack our enemies. It is a shield, and sometimes, to keep the shield strong, you have to protect people you do not like. The courtroom is empty now. The lights are turned off, and the heavy doors are locked. The cleaners have swept away the dust, the papers, and the anger of the day. Judge Elena Ross stood in her chambers for the last time that night. She took off her black robe and hung it on the hook behind the door. Underneath the robe, she was wearing a simple gray dress. Without the black silk, she did not look like a powerful symbol of the government. She just looked like a tired woman ready to go home. She walked out of the building and into the cool night air. The rain had finally stopped. The clouds were breaking apart, revealing a few small stars above the bright lights of the city. She hailed a taxi. As she sat in the back seat, watching the city pass by, she saw a newspaper on the seat next to her. Her face was still on the front page, but she did not pick it up. She did not need to read it. She knew who she was. Most people think that strength is roaring like a lion. They think power is shouting until you get what you want. But Elena taught us something different tonight. She taught us that sometimes strength is silence. Sometimes power is the ability to sit in a chair, hold a pen, and say no when the whole world wants you to say yes. That night, Elena ate a quiet dinner alone. She drank her tea, and then she went to sleep. She slept deeply and peacefully, because a clear conscience is the softest pillow in the world. Teachers, note and question. I hope you enjoyed this story about law, justice, and the difficulty of making hard choices. In life, we all have moments where we must choose between being popular and being right. It is never easy. If you were Judge Elena, what would you have done? Would you have allowed the evidence to put a bad man in prison? Or would you have protected the rules, even if it meant letting him go free? If this story helped you practice your English listening today, please click the like button on the video. It helps other students find these stories. And if you want to practice your writing, tell me in the comments. I would choose the law or I would choose justice. Thank you for listening. Sleep well, and I will see you in the next story.